Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton and welcome to this Photoshop Masterclass video from Digital Photo, the UK's best-selling photography and imaging magazine. One of Photoshop's best-kept secrets is the History palette. While many users think it's simply a glorified undo option, and in many ways it does enhance your ability to correct mistakes, that's only the start of its usefulness. Because used in the right way, it can be a powerful creative tool in its own right, achieving effects similar to those found via the Layers palette. Effects like darkening a sky and holding back buildings that are jutting into it, and also enlarging areas of the foreground, just as we've done with this taxi here. And also more elaborate treatments like popping colour, where we've desaturated the rest of the image and just held the bright yellow taxi in full colour there in the foreground. That's why in this tutorial we'll be taking you on a guided tour of the History palette, showing off its main features and how they can be used both creatively and to speed up your workflow. First off, let's close down our example pics here, and then if you want to practice on one of the start images provided, it's on the CD and it's called history.jpg. Okay, so first things first, let's get the History palette up on screen. I'm just going to drag mine in from the side of the workspace there, but if you can't see yours, just come up to Window and down to History. Now, when you open an image, this is what you'll see. What's known as a snapshot at the top, and one single history state below it, the open history state, which just means the first thing you've done to the picture is open it into Photoshop. So to see how it works, let's just make a few very quick adjustments to our picture. Let's first just tweak the levels slightly. That'll do. Maybe we'll bring up the curves palette, just give it a little bit of more contrast, and then perhaps finally we'll just hike the saturation a little. And what you'll see is all of those adjustments that we made have appeared within the History palette, recorded in the order that we made them, with the most recent, the hue saturation adjustment, down here at the bottom. All of these are called history states, and their usefulness to photographers can be seen simply by clicking back through them all the way back to the open image. And what that means is if you made an adjustment up here that you didn't like, you can just click back to an earlier state and correct it. Now, the number of states that can be recorded is up to you, and it's set by coming up to Edit, down to Preferences, and picking Performance. Here you'll see that our History and Cache options are set to 20 history states, but this can be set anywhere between 1 state or 1000. The only word of warning is that the more history states you have active, the more memory it will take up on your computer, and therefore things can get a little bit slow. Depending on the amount of memory you have, it's best to set your history states somewhere around 50 to 100. We'll pick 50 in this instance and click OK. Now, a solution to the problem of having too many history states is to use something called a snapshot, and that's what this is up here at the top of the palette. Now, the default option is that Photoshop will take a snapshot immediately when you open your image, but you can record another one at any time just by clicking on this icon down here at the foot of the palette. Give that a click and a new snapshot appears above the divider. This one made after we'd done our hue saturation adjustment, so if I click between the two snapshots, you'll see that's our open image state, and this is the one after we've made our levels and our curves and our saturation adjustment. And you can tell Photoshop whether you want it to create a snapshot when it opens the document just by clicking on the menu button here at the side of the palette, coming down to History Options, and ticking or unticking this top option, Automatically Create First Snapshot. Click OK to leave those options, and that should give you a taste of how flexible the options are when recording the image states during your editing. A couple more options that you'll be interested in the History palette. We've got this one down here, the Create New Document from Current State option. Nice snappy title, that one, but if you click on the latest image state there, the hue saturation one, then click on the New Document icon, you'll see that it makes a brand new file out of that present state. And that can be very handy if you want to save multiple versions of the same file that you're working on. We'll just close that one down without saving though, And the last of these icons along the bottom, the waste bin, operates just like the one in the layers palette, so you can click and drag any state you like into that bin to delete it. And of course you can delete snapshots too. Okay, so that's a brief look at how the history palette manages the adjustments to your image. But one of the icons we didn't touch on is this one here, and that's the source point icon for the history brush, which is where we can start using the history palette creatively. So let's have a look at that. First, let's just click back to our open state, the one before we made the levels adjustment. And then what I'm going to do to this image first off is I'm going to darken the sky while holding back the detail in the buildings, and I'm also going to resize the taxi in the foreground a little bit just to make it a touch more prominent. Now normally both of these adjustments would require the use of the layers palette or quite a complex selection, but by twinning the history palette with the history brush, which is just here hiding under the art history brush, so select that from the toolbox, we can get them done quickly and easily with just the one tool. Okay, let's look at darkening the sky first, just by selecting the rectangular marquee tool there from the toolbox, dragging it out over the sky, then coming up to select, down to refine edge, and in this case we'll pick a hefty amount of feathering, about 250 pixels, and click OK. Once again you'll see everything I'm doing is being recorded in the history palette, and now let's darken the sky a bit just by bringing up the levels palette again. We'll drag that black point slider in, the gamma slider over to the right, and we'll also drag this white input level slider a little to the left. So there, if I click on and off the preview button, you'll see we're darkening the sky in quite a pleasing way, but we're also blacking out these tower blocks a bit. Click OK, then come up to select and down to deselect there to get rid of those marching ants. And now we'll take a look at how the history brush is going to help us bring back the detail we've lost in the tower blocks. So let's zoom in a bit for starters, and we'll just use the hand tool, just holding down this space bar there on the keyboard to click and drag our way around. And first we'll have a look at the left hand edge of the image, just selecting the history brush tool there, and we'll set its size to about 150 pixels. Make sure the hardness is up at about 90%, that the mode is set to normal, and the opacity is at 100%. Then, because our history brush source point is set up here by this first snapshot, the one that appeared when we opened the image, we can just click on it and paint back in that detail. And the same would be true no matter where we set our history brush source point, right up to the refine edge command here. We can keep painting back through to that unaltered state. The only time when it won't work is if we click next to levels. Try painting there and we paint back in that levels adjustment that we made. So keep your source point up here near the top of the palette, say there next to open or next to that initial snapshot, and just paint back in any detail that you want. Just again using the hand tool there to scroll around the image. And then of course when we get close to the edge of these buildings we need to be a little bit careful because we don't want to be painting back in any of that undarkened sky. So just take your time when doing that and use the square bracket keys on the keyboard to drop the size of the brush so that you don't take in any of that sky. So I'm going to keep on working around this area of skyscraper here, and I'll join you in a moment. Okay, so here we are with our nicely darkened sky and our fully detailed skyscrapers. And if I just scroll back up to the top of the history palette and click on this snapshot that I made when doing that history brush work, you'll see the difference it makes to the overall image. We've brought back all that detail and dealt with the blackening that went on with the levels adjustment. So after we've done all this work, let's now take another snapshot. That'll be added up here, just so we can keep a track of where we're going in our history palette. And then we can take a look at how the history brush is going to help us enlarge this taxi in the foreground just a little bit, making it a bit more dominant. So let's get on with that. First just selecting the polygonal lasso from the toolbox, and then we'll just click around the cab to select it Don't need to be too precise here because the history brush is going to help us out a little bit later. And then, once your selection's made, just hit Ctrl and T on the keyboard to enter free transform mode. And what we're going to do to enlarge the cab is either hold down the Shift key on the keyboard to constrain the proportions, or you can also just select this little chain link icon up here in the options bar, the maintain aspect ratio icon. Give that a click and then just drag out that corner handle until you get a reading of around 120%. That should do fine. And then what we're also going to do before we finalise the transformation is just click and drag within the bounding box, just repositioning the car a little bit so that you can see the shadows of these overhead wires here. We just want to drag that so that it lines up. Okay, that should be fine. So either press return on the keyboard or click the tick up here in the options bar and the transformation will be made. And then we can get rid of our marching ant just by pressing Ctrl and D on the keyboard, or up to select and down to deselect. Now the size of the cab is looking much better, but what we've been left with is this rather strange looking hard edge around it. So it's back to the history brush tool there in the toolbox to sort it out, and we'll increase the brush size here, actually let's say about 100 pixels, and then most importantly, before we start brushing away, we want to set our history brush source point to this one here, the polygonal lasso source point, and then I'm just going to zoom in on that area of the image so we get a good look at what's going on. I can just click and paint those pixels back in from the previous state so that we get a nice believable join between our car and the street. And there we go, we're just kind of going back in time to a state of the image where we hadn't enlarged the car, of course. And just down here I'm going to soften the edge of the brush a little bit just by holding the Shift key and pressing the left square bracket just so we get a nice join between those two areas. That should be okay. We'll continue around the back of the car, just hardening it up again as we kind of get close to the body of the vehicle, then using a softer brush once more around the very edge of the area we've enlarged. And if you do paint in any areas that you don't want, like here I've just kind of gone back a little bit too much and I've included part of the original car, just stop straight away and press Ctrl and Z on the keyboard to undo it, or in fact step back a stage in the history palette, or you can click within the history palette itself and of course that'll take you back even further. So let's come out to a full view again, and there you can see that we've quickly and easily blended that car in its enlarged state without using layers. Right, so that's looking pretty good to me. I'm just going to take another snapshot at this stage. So we keep building them up at the top of the palette there. And now we'll come on to our final example of the trickery of the history brush, and that's applying a pop color effect. Once again, it's quick and easy to do, and the first thing we're going to have to do to the image to make this happen is desaturate it. Of course, there are many ways to do this. We won't go into them here. In this case, we're just going to press Ctrl, Shift and U on the keyboard to just take all of that color straight out. All the color's gone all over the image, including our taxi at the bottom, but just as we did before with the skyscrapers and the painting back in of the tarmac, all we need to do is just click back one history state, or indeed we could use our snapshot here at the top, and when I use the history brush on the image, you'll see that we paint that color back in. And just harden up the edge of the brush again a little bit, increase its size to about 200 pixels, and it's really quick and easy to do. And just like that, we've got a smart looking color popped image. So that should have given you a good idea of how the history brush works in conjunction with the history palette. It's all about kind of going back in time and painting in pixels from previous history states. The very last thing we're going to look at in this video lesson is non-linear history. So what I'm first going to do is use the Create New Document icon at the bottom of the history palette there. Give that a click, and that'll give us a nice, fresh, new image to work on where I can show you how non-linear history works. Okay, let's imagine that we're making various adjustments to this image once more. We can do all the stuff we did before. We can go back in and make a levels adjustment. We can maybe kind of mess around a little bit with the colors using the curves palette, just kind of selecting them individually and shifting things around so we get a more interesting kind of background. We can again control the saturation or the hue of the image. All of these things are open to us, and they'll all appear in the history palette when those adjustments are made. Now this is because our history palette is working in a linear fashion. That's the default setting. So what will happen when I click back onto the levels adjustment and make a sort of a completely different adjustment to the image? Say this time I just want to desaturate it completely. What will happen is those history states that were in advance of that levels adjustment, they'll disappear. So Control, Shift and U on the keyboard to desaturate the image, and there our curves and our hue saturation adjustment have gone. They've been overwritten and they've been removed from the history. What happens though when you select non-linear history? And you can do that just by clicking on the fly out menu, selecting history options and checking it in the box here, allow non-linear history, is that I can do all of those things again, mess around with the curves, apply some strange kind of toning effect using hue saturation. And though those things are being recorded in what seems like a regular way now, if I, as I did before, skip back to the levels adjustment that I made and then make a completely separate adjustment, once again perhaps coming back to the curves palette and this time kind of darkening the whole image, when I click OK, you'll see that now it gets added to the bottom of the stack, and all of those other history states that we had before have been preserved. Now, how useful this is really depends on the way that you want to edit your images. But one of the advantages it brings is that you can have your picture in lots of different states, and you can kind of pick and choose between them, decide which one's best, and then go for the treatment that works best for you. The only thing is, it can be a little bit heavy on memory, but have a play around with it, see if it works for you, and the best way to do that is to practice. Once you're done though, it can be turned off once again using the history options. Just untick it there in the dialog box, click OK, and you'll return to the regular linear version of history. The very last thing that it's important to know when you're using history and painting back in time with the history brush, as we've been doing here, is that if you make any change to the pixel dimensions of your image, it will no longer function. Here for instance, I can of course click on my curves history state there and I can paint that information back through. But if I subsequently change the size of my image, so let's just come up to image, down to image size, then reduce its size to say 2500 pixels in width, click OK, the image gets smaller, but now I can't paint back through. I get a warning that it's not possible. So that's one to watch out for. All it means really is do your cropping and your resizing at the start of the workflow. And the same can be said for changing color modes. If I just drag out that history state to the bin for a moment, so we'll go back to our original size. Once again, clicking back on the levels history state, I can paint all that information back through. But if I come up to image, down to mode, and change the color mode of the image to CMYK for example, once again, it won't work. Okay, so that's our tour of the history palette and all of its functions complete. I hope you enjoyed that and that you'll give it a go on your own images. It's a very handy tool to know how to use, and certainly one that's worth having in your imaging arsenal. See you next time.